What was Paul's thorn? Astonishing mystery revealed. Imagine standing in front of a man who saw the risen Christ with his own eyes, who wrote nearly half of the New Testament, who walked in supernatural power, survived shipwrecks, faced mobs, and planted churches across the ancient world. And hearing him say, "I begged God to take it away from me, but he didn't." That man was Paul. This wasn't just a passing inconvenience. It was torment. He called it a thorn in the flesh, something sharp, agonizing, constant. And no matter how deeply he prayed, how earnestly he pleaded, God's answer remained, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Now pause right there, because that flips the script, doesn't it? In a world that tells us to be stronger, better, and more in control, here is Paul, the mighty apostle, being told that weakness is the very place where God's power shows up best. That the thing he hated, the thing he didn't choose, the thing that made him feel broken, was actually sacred ground. You might be surprised to know, the Bible never clearly tells us what Paul's thorn was. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. Because if God had told us exactly what Paul was dealing with, we might read it and think, well, that's not me. But he didn't. He left it open, ambiguous on purpose, and in doing so, he invited you into the story. Because let's be honest, you have a thorn too. It may not look like Paul's, but you know the ache. You know the prayer you've prayed over and over, the burden you carry in secret, the battle that won't seem to let go. And right here, in this mystery, lies one of the most astonishing revelations in all of Scripture, not just about Paul's life, but about yours. So if you've ever wondered why God doesn't always remove the thing that hurts, if you've ever felt weak and wondered where God's power was in it all, stay with me, because what we're about to uncover is not just a study of Paul's thorn, it's a window into God's heart. The mystery is deeper than you think. The purpose is more powerful than you imagined. And once you see it, you'll never look at your weakness the same way again. Number 1. The man behind the mystery. Who was Paul? Before we dive into what Paul's thorn might have been, we need to step back and take a good look at who Paul was. Because the more we understand the man, the more the mystery of his thorn begins to shine with surprising purpose. Paul wasn't your average follower of Jesus. In fact, he started off on the complete opposite side. Back when he was still known as Saul of Tarsus, he was a Pharisee through and through, a rising star in Jewish leadership, highly educated under the famous teacher Gamaliel, and absolutely relentless in his mission to destroy the early church. He saw Christians not as misguided, but as dangerous heretics, and he made it his life's goal to wipe them out. That is, until one day on the road to Damascus, a blinding light, a voice from heaven, Jesus himself, appearing to Saul and asking him the question that would change his life. "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Acts 9:4. In that moment, the persecutor became the preacher. The hunter of Christians became one of their greatest defenders. God didn't just save Paul, he commissioned him. From that moment forward, Paul's life was completely turned upside down. He traveled across the Roman Empire, preaching the gospel with boldness, planting churches, mentoring leaders, and writing letters that would later become much of the New Testament. He faced fierce persecution, often to the point of death. He was beaten with rods, stoned, whipped, imprisoned, shipwrecked, and falsely accused. And yet he never stopped. Why? Because Paul had seen the resurrected Christ, and once you've seen Jesus, you can't go back. Paul was deeply intellectual, yet profoundly spiritual. He carried the weight of church leadership, yet walked with humility. He was bold in truth, but soft in love. And more than anything else, he was passionate about the grace of God, because he had experienced it firsthand. So when someone like Paul talks about a thorn, when a man that strong, that seasoned, that surrendered says he's carrying something he wants gone, we should lean in. It tells us that even the most powerful, spirit-filled people aren't immune to pain. that even the ones God uses the most still walk with something they wish they didn't have. It reminds us that spiritual maturity doesn't mean the absence of struggle. It means knowing where to take it. And Paul took it straight to the Lord. That's the man behind the mystery, a spiritual giant with a very human weakness. Number 2, a thorn in the flesh, where it all begins. We find the core of this mystery tucked into one of Paul's most personal, vulnerable letters, 2 Corinthians. This isn't a letter full of grand theology or sweeping doctrine. This one's different. This one is raw. Paul is under fire. False apostles have crept into the Corinthian church, trying to discredit him. They boast about their spiritual visions, their eloquent speech, their qualifications. Paul, instead of matching their pride, does something completely unexpected. He tells the church about his weaknesses. He begins the 12th chapter by describing a powerful experience, a vision of heaven. Whether in the body or out of the body, he doesn't know. But he was caught up into paradise and heard things too wonderful to repeat. This wasn't a normal vision. This was holy ground. But then, right after describing this incredible encounter, Paul says something that flips everything upside down. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 2 Corinthians 12:7. Wait, what? What? He goes from heavenly visions to satanic torment in the same breath, from paradise to pain. Notice his words, I was given. That's intentional. Paul saw this thorn not just as an attack from Satan, but as something allowed, even purposed by God. It was a gift he didn't want, a teacher he didn't choose, a burden that wouldn't leave. And he was honest about it. Paul didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't pretend it was easy. He says clearly, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. Verse 8. 3 times. Think about that. This is the same man who prayed and saw the dead raised, who healed the sick, cast out demons, and preached with power. And yet here, he's begging God for deliverance and hearing no. Instead of removing the thorn, God responds with a promise. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Verse 9. This wasn't just about Paul's comfort. It was about God's purpose. And this is where the mystery deepens, because Paul doesn't tell us what the thorn was. He doesn't give us the details we're hungry for. Instead, he shifts the focus entirely from what the thorn was to what it revealed. That changes everything. The thorn wasn't the problem. Pride was the real danger, and God, in his mercy, allowed Paul to walk with something painful, not to punish him, but to protect him. Let that sink in. Sometimes God allows pain, not because he's distant, but because he's close. Not because he's angry, but because he's wise. And sometimes what we call a burden, he calls a blessing in disguise. Paul's thorn may be unnamed, but its purpose couldn't be clearer. It was there to keep him humble and to reveal that God's grace doesn't always remove the weakness. Sometimes it fills it. Number 3, exploring the possibilities. What could the thorn be? Here's where the mystery really starts to draw us in. Because if Paul's thorn was so significant, if it caused him pain, drove him to prayer, and kept him dependent on God, what was it? We're not the first to ask. In fact, for nearly 2,000 years, scholars, theologians, and everyday believers have wrestled with this very question. And while the Bible never spells it out, several strong possibilities have emerged over time. Let's walk through a few. First, the physical theory. And many believe Paul's thorn was some kind of chronic physical ailment, something painful, debilitating, and maybe even disfiguring. Some have suggested severe eye problems. Based on what Paul wrote in Galatians, you would have plucked out your eyes and given them to me. Galatians. Others think it could have been migraines, epilepsy, recurring malaria, or even the lingering effects of the many beatings and stonings he endured throughout his ministry. There's a reason this theory holds weight. Physical pain wears on a person. It's not just the pain itself. It's the frustration, the limits, the weakness you feel in your body. And for someone like Paul, active, mission-minded, always on the move, a physical limitation would have been a humbling and ongoing reminder of his dependence on God. Next, the spiritual theory. Paul himself says the thorn was a messenger of Satan sent to torment him. That language could point to spiritual warfare, a persistent demonic attack, a spiritual harassment that followed him wherever he went. Maybe it was opposition from people stirred up by demonic forces. Maybe it was internal, like severe temptation, intense anxiety, or even a deep nagging sense of unworthiness. It's worth remembering, Paul had a past. He had persecuted the church. He stood by and approved of the death of Stephen. What if part of the thorn was a spiritual burden of guilt or accusation that Satan kept trying to use against him? Then there's the emotional or psychological theory. We often forget that Paul was human. He had emotions, wounds, relationships. He felt abandoned, betrayed, misunderstood. He even wrote, "We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself." 2 Corinthians 1:8. That doesn't sound like a man untouched by emotional suffering. Maybe the thorn was connected to loneliness, anxiety, or depression. Maybe it was the deep grief of watching churches he planted fall into sin. Maybe it was the pain of being constantly misunderstood, falsely accused, or rejected by his own people. And finally, some suggest it was external opposition, people themselves. Everywhere Paul went, there was resistance. In 2 Timothy 4:14, he even names one man specifically, Alexander the coppersmith, who did him a great deal of harm. It's possible Paul's thorn wasn't a thing inside of him, but people around him who constantly tried to discredit and oppose his work. So which one was it? Honestly, we don't know. And that's what makes this passage so powerful. God, in his wisdom, kept the thorn anonymous. It wasn't about what Paul was struggling with. It was about what the struggle did in him, about how it reshaped his soul, about how it revealed God's glory through his weakness. And in that silence, in that blank space, God created room for your story. Because when you read that Paul had a thorn, and you're not told what it was, you're invited to bring your thorn into the picture, your weakness, your pain, your battle. Suddenly, this isn't just Paul's story anymore, it's yours too. God left it open so that we would lean in. Number 4, why would God allow it? Let's be real. This is the question that sits at the center of every painful season, every unanswered prayer, every quiet no from heaven. If God loves me, why would he allow this? Paul asked it too, not once, not casually, but 3 times. I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. 2 Corinthians 12:8. He didn't just pray, he pleaded. He cried out. He was desperate for relief. And God said no. Or rather, God said something deeper. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. That's not the answer Paul wanted, but it was the answer Paul needed. Because God wasn't just trying to ease Paul's pain, he was shaping Paul's soul. You see, the thorn wasn't punishment, it was protection. Paul had seen the heights of heaven. He had experienced revelation few people in history have ever known. And with that kind of spiritual exposure, the temptation to pride would have been very real. God knew that pride can destroy a person faster than pain ever could. So instead of removing the struggle, he used it as a safeguard. To keep me from becoming conceited, Paul says. Think about that. He saw the thorn, not as a random affliction, but as a divine tool, something God allowed to keep his heart humble, dependent, and usable. And here's where this touches your life. Maybe the pain you're carrying isn't because God is distant. Maybe it's because he's that close. Maybe he's doing a deeper work in you, one that comfort alone could never produce. We live in a culture that equates blessing with ease, that says if God is for you, everything should go smoothly. But Scripture tells a different story. It tells us of a God who sometimes says no to give us something better. He doesn't always remove the thorn, but he always gives grace to endure it. And not just barely endure it. He says, "My power is made perfect in weakness." In other words, God's power doesn't just tolerate your weakness. It inhabits it. It fills the cracks. It shows up in the places you feel most broken. That's where he does his best work. When you're at the end of yourself, you're at the beginning of his strength. That's why Paul, after hearing God's response, doesn't spiral into despair. He says something radical, something that only makes sense in the kingdom of God. "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." Boast in weakness? Gladly? Yes, because Paul learned what so many of us are still learning. The thorn may never leave, but neither will God's presence, and his presence is worth more than a painless life. You don't have to understand everything to trust God in the middle of it. So if you're walking through something painful right now, a thorn that just won't go away, let this truth anchor you. God's grace is enough, not just to get you through, but to show his power through you. Number 5. Paul's thorn and your struggles. This is where it gets real. Because let's be honest, it's one thing to read about Paul's thorn, to analyze the Greek words, to study the history, but at some point you realize this isn't just about Paul. It's about you. Because whether you've admitted it or not, you've got a thorn too. Maybe it's physical, a chronic illness, a body that doesn't work the way it used to, or never did. Maybe it's mental or emotional, a heaviness you can't shake, a diagnosis you didn't ask for, anxiety, depression, panic attacks in the middle of the night. Maybe your thorn is relational, a betrayal you never saw coming, a broken marriage, a prodigal child. Or maybe it's spiritual, a temptation that keeps circling back, a season of silence where you feel like God is far away, a battle no one sees but you live with every day. Here's the hard truth we often avoid. Being a Christian doesn't exempt you from suffering. In fact, sometimes following Jesus invites it. But here's the even better truth, and don't miss this. Suffering doesn't mean you're forsaken. It means you're being formed. Yet, Paul didn't hide his thorn. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to pretend it wasn't affecting him. He took it to God, again and again. He wrestled with it, and when God didn't take it away, Paul didn't walk away. He leaned in. That's what you're invited to do too. Don't waste your pain. Don't numb it. Avoid it, or spiritualize it away. Bring it to the Lord. Let it press you deeper into grace. Let it soften your heart. Let it teach you to depend on strength that isn't your own. Because if Paul, the boldest missionary in history, the man who wrote words that still shake the world, had a thorn, then having one doesn't disqualify you. It doesn't mean God's done with you. It doesn't mean your faith is broken or your prayers are weak. It means you're human. And it means God is doing something deep, even in what you don't understand. You see, God doesn't just use the polished parts of your story. He uses the painful parts too, the messy, raw, unfinished chapters. That's where his glory shows up best. You don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You just have to be surrendered. So whatever your thorn is, name it. Not with shame, but with honesty. Bring it into the light, because God's grace isn't just enough for Paul's thorn, it's enough for yours. Number 6, living with the thorn, power in weakness. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get said enough in Christian circles. Sometimes the thorn doesn't go away. Sometimes you pray the prayer, fast the fast, believe with all your heart, and the healing doesn't come. The door doesn't open, the storm doesn't lift, and you're left walking with something that you know God could take away, but for some reason he hasn't. So what then? Paul shows us the way forward. He didn't stop his ministry because of the thorn. He didn't disqualify himself. He didn't crawl into a corner and say, well, I guess I'm no longer useful. No, he kept going, kept preaching, kept planting churches, kept writing, kept loving, kept serving. The thorn didn't stop Paul's mission, it shaped it. And it can shape yours too. Because here's the paradox at the heart of the gospel. The weaker you are, the more clearly God's strength can shine through you, not in spite of your weakness, but because of it. Paul said, "That is why for Christ's sake I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." 2 Corinthians 12:10. Read that again, slowly. He doesn't just say he endures these things. He says he delights in them. Why? Because they open the door to something greater than comfort, the power of Christ resting on him. The word Paul uses here, rest, is the same kind of language used for God's presence dwelling in the tabernacle in the Old Testament. It's not a distant encouragement. It's a dwelling presence, a power that settles in and makes itself at home right in the middle of your weakness. This is what separates Christianity from every other way of thinking. Most people try to avoid weakness, to hide it, to overcome it, but Jesus walked straight into it. He became weak on purpose. He embraced suffering. He chose the cross. And now he invites you to stop running from your own. Because when you stop resisting the thorn and start trusting the grace, something incredible happens. You become free from the pressure to impress, free from the fear of not measuring up, free to live fully dependent on the one who has already overcome. And that kind of freedom, it's unstoppable. Just look at history. So many of the most powerful followers of Jesus, past and present, have lived with thorns. They battled chronic illness, deep depression, devastating loss, and yet they radiated hope. Why? Because they didn't pretend to be strong. They learned to lean on a strength that was not their own. And you can too. You may not get to choose your thorn, but you can choose how you walk with it. You can either let it define you or let it refine you. Paul chose to let it refine him, and through that refining, God changed the world. Number 7, the hidden gift in the thorn. By now, we've followed Paul through the pain of his thorn, the mystery of what it was, and the beauty of how God used it. But before we close this journey, we have to look deeper, not just at what the thorn did, but at what it gave. Because hidden in the heart of Paul's thorn was a gift Paul never would have asked for, but one he never stopped thanking God for once he understood it. That gift was grace, not just the saving grace that met him on the road to Damascus, but sustaining grace, the daily, moment-by-moment strength to keep going when nothing made sense, the kind of grace that walks with you, not around the valley, but through it. Sometimes what we think is punishment is actually preparation, and sometimes the thing we're begging God to remove is the very thing he's using to draw us closer. God wasn't being cruel when he allowed Paul to live with a thorn. He was being kind. He wasn't weakening Paul, he was deepening him. Because thorns don't just cause pain, they teach. They strip away pride. They create hunger for God's presence. They keep us from becoming too comfortable, too self-reliant, too distracted. And over time, they do something beautiful. They transform us. Paul says, "That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses." Delight, not just tolerate, not just accept, delight. Not because the pain felt good, but because the power of Christ became real in a way it never had before. That's the hidden gift. And the truth is, your thorn might be doing the same thing. Maybe the season you're walking through right now, the thing you hate, the thing that feels like it's breaking you, is actually birthing something sacred, a deeper dependency, a purer love, a quieter strength, a faith that no longer rests on results, but on relationship. You see, God doesn't waste your pain, not one drop of it, every sleepless night, every lonely prayer, every tear you've cried. He sees it, he holds it, and he uses it. Some of your most powerful ministry will come not from your victories, but from your valleys, not from the moments you looked strong, but from the times you were weak, and God carried you anyway. That's why the thorn matters. Not because of what it is, but because of what it reveals. Your thorn is not the end of your story. It might just be the beginning of the most powerful part, the place where God moves in ways you never expected, the place where you become someone new, someone humbler, kinder, stronger in your surrender. And one day, when you look back, you may not say, "I loved the thorn," but you will say, "I loved what God did through it." That's the gift. Conclusion. We set out on a journey to uncover the mystery of Paul's thorn, and maybe you were hoping for a clear answer, a label, a diagnosis, a concrete explanation. But maybe the real revelation isn't in knowing what the thorn was. Maybe it's in understanding why it was there. Because Paul's thorn, it wasn't a curse, it was a commission, a reminder that strength doesn't come from comfort, but from Christ. A declaration that weakness isn't something to be ashamed of. It's sacred ground where God's power shows up best. And maybe the same is true for you. Maybe your unanswered prayer, your lingering struggle, your hidden pain. Maybe it's not a detour. Maybe it's divine design. God never promised us a life without thorns, but He did promise that His grace would be enough, and He's never broken that promise. So today, wherever you are, whatever you're carrying, I want to speak this over you. His grace is still sufficient. His power is still made perfect in weakness. And His presence is still with you, even in the thorn. Don't be afraid of your weakness. Don't hide it. Don't let it shame you. Let it point you to the one who is strong, the one who said no to Paul, not because he didn't love him, but because he loved him that much. God's grace was enough for Paul. And friend, it's enough for you too. Stay in the fight, keep walking, keep trusting, and watch how God turns even your thorns into something glorious. Because the story isn't over yet.